Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Susan McGuire, Director of Professional Development at ACCE, and I'm happy to welcome you to this afternoon's webinar, led by Greg Laposa of the St. Louis Regional Chamber and Nataly Garzon of Ready by 21 St. Louis. Greg and Nataly will be discussing their work to ensure greater racial equity in the region's workforce and promote a vibrant, diverse, and thriving business community in St. Louis through participation in the St. Louis Regional Youth Employment Coalition. Before I turn the program over to Greg and Nataly, I just have a few housekeeping notes. First, attendees are in listen-only mode during the webinar to avoid background noise. And second, after the presentation, we will have time for questions. You can ask those questions by using the question function of the webinar. The question box is on the lower right-hand corner of your screen. You can type in your question anytime during the webinar or after the presentation, and I will read the question to Greg and Nataly after their presentation. If we run out of time and don't get to your question, or if you have a question that you prefer to discuss with them offline, you can feel free to contact them individually. Their contact information will be included in the presentation on the last slide. If you've typed in a question that we just haven't gotten to because of time, we will get in touch with you after the webinar to answer it. And third, this webinar is being recorded, and it will be up on the ACC website on the ACC University webinar page by Monday, April 8th. In addition, the presentation slides are uploaded to the webinar panel on the right-hand side of your computer screen. You can just click where it says Handouts, open that box, click on the presentation to download it to your computer. If you can't download it for any reason, or you'd prefer not to during the presentation, no worries at all. I will post the presentation slides right along with the webinar recording. So with that, I will introduce our speakers for today. Greg Laposa is the Vice President of Education Strategies at the St. Louis Regional Chamber. Greg has been leading strategic initiatives to see St. Louis become a top 10 region for education attainment by 2025. He is charged with implementing projects that address regional talent shortages, promote increased post-secondary attainment, and strengthen collaboration between business and higher education to achieve shared workforce objectives. Under his leadership, the Chamber organized a broad cross-sector initiative to forge the St. Louis Regional Education Commitment and launched a new program to increase the attainment rate of working adults in the St. Louis community. Nataly Garzon is a specialist in systems change strategies with Ready by 21 St. Louis and is a content expert in youth workforce development and leading cross-sector collaboratives. Nataly graduated from Williams College in 2014 and has since supported cross-sector collaboratives focused on population-level outcomes. She worked for a United Way in Massachusetts for 3 years, supporting several coalitions working on tackling teen pregnancy reduction and teen substance abuse reduction. Through those collaborative efforts, there was a 54% reduction in teen births and a 17% reduction in teen alcohol consumption in the county. She joined the Ready by 21 St. Louis team in the summer of 2017 and has been working with regional stakeholders to stand up the St. Louis Regional Youth Employment Coalition for the last year. So thank you so much, Greg and Nataly, for joining us and presenting today. And at this point, I will pass the presentation over to you.
Well, thank you, Susan. Really appreciate the opportunity to share with the audience today some of the things that we're working on in St. Louis to address our workforce shortages, our skills gaps. I think I'll start by giving a little bit of background about the Chamber. I mean, much of this presentation is really focused on a collective effort that's being shared by United Way and the St. Louis Regional Chamber, along with a variety of other partners. But the Chamber's involved in this work because we are the primary economic development organization for the St. Louis region, as well as one of the largest private sector membership associations in St. Louis. We consider ourselves and frame ourselves as a broad community of leaders that are united for economic prosperity for the St. Louis region. And we have really a couple key focuses. One is we are a traditional membership association like chambers normally are in a community, but we're also the primary economic development organization. So we have efforts that focus on business attraction, retention, to St. Louis and supporting our business community thrive in the region. We represent 15 counties and the bi-state area that makes up the St. Louis region. And we have over 1,000 members that are part of the St. Louis Regional Chamber that represent some of the largest employers and employee bases in the region. The Chamber is really involved in this work because we see increased educational attainment and workforce preparedness as being key to economic prosperity for the St. Louis region. We know that our companies have stressed the point with us that they can't grow and thrive in St. Louis unless they have a skilled workforce. And in the midst of a tight labor market that I'm sure many communities, many of you who are part of those communities are seeing, this tight labor market has caused more employers to have more open positions and not enough talent to fill those positions. And so right now in particular, we've heard many of our board members tell us, and our membership broadly tell us, that they need to see real workforce solutions on the part of the Chamber to help address their needs. So the presentation I'm going to go through today is really, I'm going to start off by setting the context a little bit, really grounding this conversation in the relevant data for the St. Louis region, and talk about some of our data sources, because I think it might be helpful for many of you who are maybe thinking about how do you organize similar efforts. And then really turn it over to Nataly to talk more about the Regional Youth Employment Coalition, because it's really been created under her leadership, and the Chamber is a key part of that. But we're just a part of a broader group that she's brought together. So we'll start with going over some economic and workforce data for St. Louis. Sorry, I'm having trouble moving my slides there. Sorry about that. So the first point to make is that we on an annual basis have a report on our St. Louis's workforce needs. It's called the State of St. Louis Workforce Report. So this report looks at in interviewing employers in the region and finding out what their biggest challenges are. Over the last 3 years, we've consistently seen that employers indicate that it's not government regulations or generally the economic landscape that's causing challenges for employers. It's really fundamentally rooted in having more open positions than available talent. And St. Louis has a number of industries that we consider our strengths. Healthcare is one, multimodal logistics and advanced manufacturing is another, financial services, information technology. These are all industries that we think give St. Louis a competitive edge, but we see in these industries that there are significant and pronounced shortages, or there's goals for expansion and currently not having the predictable flow of talent to help support that expansion. So there's key occupations and key positions that continue to remain open, and this is, again, both hurting the region's efforts to grow the companies that are already here, but it's also an important factor when employers are looking at the St. Louis region to consider coming here and investing in this region. They'll often identify some very specific talent needs that their companies have, and if St. Louis can't convince those companies that we have the workforce that's sufficient to meet their needs, then they won't come here. So some of the areas that you see on this slide in information technology, financial services, and healthcare, are some of the areas that we consistently have seen both reported by those employer surveys, but also we've heard anecdotally through those conversations with employers we're trying to recruit to the region as being some of those in demand. And you'll notice that there's a number of occupations or skills that employers are looking for that also cut across sectors too. So customer service, project management being two that we see, really spans across sectors and is in great demand. In addition to skilled credentials or degrees, we're also seeing that there's a demand for specific, soft skills. They might be called softer skills. We consider them in many ways essential skills for employees. That could be looking at something as basic as poor work ethic or poor work habits, all the way up to more complex skills like having strong critical thinking and problem-solving skills. We see that leadership and the ability to have good emotional intelligence is now becoming more and more something that employers are talking about, saying that they're not seeing those as strengths in the pool of applicants that they're getting or that they're hiring, and that's in great demand. And really, as we look at the changing needs of the economy, and especially if you consider the increasing automation that technology is causing, we need more lifelong learners. We need people who know how to think critically, people who know how to learn more information, who maintain that level of curiosity and that desire for growth. And then creativity even is becoming something that we're hearing more from employers as being absolutely essential. So again, our employers might be looking for specific credentials, but they're also looking for more what I would consider kind of holistic skill sets that just an individual needs to possess to really be standout talent for companies. So the Chamber took a look at some relevant data using the Burning Glass Technologies regional scans for St. Louis, and so we've been looking at what are the jobs that are in most demand, where are we seeing consistently these jobs being reported through job postings, ads as being significant, and then this information has been shared with Nataly and her team at United Way as they've thought about how do we organize some of our efforts around employer engagement, and she'll talk a lot more about how they've aligned the work of that Regional Youth Employment Coalition to meeting in-demand, high-growth industries. But it really starts with this data, and I think that's an important point that I want to stress, is that you can have members at your chamber who are telling you that they feel particular pain points, but I think it's important to keep that broader regional perspective, especially if you work with many employers throughout a larger MSA. So looking at that regional job scan is important. I already noted some of the job families. These are really clusters, basically. Think of them that way, clusters that are in high demand. So this helps us to see consistent themes. And for St. Louis, based on, again, our regional scan, we see the most demand for computer mathematical skills, healthcare, transportation, and material moving, being centrally located in St. Louis. Logistics management is really key for our region. So you see that becomes a very important need in St. Louis. And we see more and more that there's a demand for just generally business processes, business operations skills. But the regional data only tells you so much. It only gives you a partial picture. So the Chamber also really, because we had an opportunity presented to us to join the graduate networks, Bridging the Talent Gap initiative, we were able to actually survey the members that make up our Chamber's leadership and some of our key investors in the Chamber to go a little bit deeper and more granular on their particular workforce shortages, and also to understand, how whether or not the skills of the workforce that they currently have were sufficient to meet anticipated plans for growth and their needs for the future. And so we were able to get responses from roughly 289 surveys that we administered. We had a pretty diverse group of industries and businesses that were represented. You see that varied in size. So we had, a substantial portion of our membership, which I would actually consider to be oftentimes top-heavy in the way of really focused on kind of top corporations in St. Louis as the regional chamber. But we saw that there were many small businesses, small employers who completed this survey and who clearly communicated their workforce challenges. And then we had, close to even medium-sized and large employers. We did see a significant portion of the respondents coming from the professional, scientific, and technical services. But really, you see here there's a top 5 list, but we really had, upwards of 20 different industries that were represented in the entire survey. So this was really helpful information for us because it helped us to look at what are some of the cross-cutting themes that we're seeing across those industries, and also what are the biggest pain points that our members that work with us on a regular basis and that we're here to serve, what they're saying is most pressing for them. So what we learned from the survey is that, there's a number of challenges that employers might face when it comes to hiring. Competition from other employers was on the top, along with the low number of applicants and lacking the right skills for the job. So this is a consistent, again, theme that we've been hearing, whether it's this chamber survey or whether it's the State of the St. Louis Workforce Report. They roughly tell us similar things, which is that they're not seeing enough applicants. They're not seeing that, when they have the applicants for jobs, that there's still a substantial portion that say that they don't have the right skills. So then we also looked at, what are the education needs, or what are the credentials that are necessary for your employees to to succeed now and then over the next 5 years. So we ask them to really anticipate what their needs might be. And in a lot of communities that I've been able to participate or been able to learn from and partly participate in conferences or talking to colleagues across different communities, we see that there's an increased demand for folks who have, backgrounds with technical colleges or technical skills. Industry recognized credentials continue to become important. And I think that there's been generally a push made that, the 4-year degree path is not for everyone, and it's not, what it used to be in terms of commanding the value that it has. But we've seen, at least based on this employer data that we administered, that there's still an significant expected growth in bachelor degree attainment. Again, that might be reflected in the fact that, whoever the industries that were represented may have had more jobs that require that bachelor's degree. But that still doesn't mean that there's not a great need across the board for high quality certificates, other credentials, 2-year degrees. So we've been very careful at the chamber to make sure that we're not saying it's one degree path over another. It really is looking at the broad needs that we have, and also looking at stackability and looking at people's ability to continue to develop new skills and advance their education to stay current and move throughout the economy. But one thing that we found that was striking from the survey was that many of the education institutions that we would think are natural partners for business in solving some of their workforce challenges weren't actively in dialogue or communication with employers. We had only 13% of employers who completed the survey say that they actively partner with a local post-secondary institution, and roughly 80% indicating that they were definitely or possibly interested in working more with our workforce organizations and higher education institutions in the region. And I think this is important because, again, if our workforce shortages and our talent needs are so pressing and so important to business, they have to be they have to really play a leading role in working actively in partnership with higher education and with workforce organizations to build out programming that might support their needs. And we also think that, outside of just those partnerships between business and higher education and workforce, we also need community-based organizations that are out there working with people in our communities to be part of that conversation as well. So this was an important point to show that there's a lot of opportunity for the chamber as a convener in the region to foster the kind of dialogue that leads to more effective talent pathway development or talent pipeline development. And if we look at our regional data too, we also know that racial disparities in employment are really important for us to pay attention to. It's one thing to talk about our overall employment numbers as a region and say that they're fairly low. It's another to really look at who's benefiting from employment opportunities and who's not, or who still has significantly high rates of unemployment. So in the St. Louis region, we see that African Americans have more than twice the rate of unemployment as white residents. We see that based on educational attainment, there's significant disparities and discrepancies in the level of folks who have high school diplomas all the way through bachelor's degree attainment, and that gap widens the more you move up through education. And then when you just look at overall unemployment, the last point here is really a national number. Nataly's going to talk a little bit more about unemployment for St. Louis City and County, but this national number that I think is important for all of us to keep in mind is that we've got to look at youth employment opportunities and really focus on that. So we see that there's still significant disparities in the unemployment rate for African Americans and white residents, with it being nearly or really twice the rate of white for African Americans as it is for white Americans. So again, important for us to be paying attention to and working intentionally to solve, because these issues don't solve themselves, obviously. So we need to make sure that we're making sure that there's shared prosperity throughout our region. And if we do that, then we really make sure that our larger economy benefits. It's beneficial for everyone if we focus on closing equity gaps. So that's why we've decided to partner with the United Way and the Regional Youth Employment Coalition. One, because they're very focused on addressing the workforce shortages in our region, and by focusing on youth employment, which we see as a critical opportunity. And then because they have such a sharp focus on racial equity, we think that this helps us with that other primary goal of really looking at how we reduce disparities in employment opportunities and educational attainment. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nataly Garzon to take us through much of the work of the Regional Youth Employment Coalition.
Thank you, Greg. So to give you a little bit of context, I work for the United Way of Greater St. Louis. The United Way of Greater St. Louis raises on average about $76 million a year, and it is the largest fundraiser in the United Way ecosystem. Our mission is really centered around helping people live their best possible lives, and how we attempt to achieve that is twofold. First, by funding organizations and programs in our region, but also by serving as a convener and bringing different stakeholders together to really try to tackle some of our biggest community issues. So Ready by 21 is one of those initiatives that the United Way of Greater St. Louis houses that's really trying to tackle the underlying issues so that we can really change the trajectory of a generation. So starting with really what is the St. Louis Regional Youth Employment Coalition, as Greg highlighted, our mission is really centered around racial equity and recognizing that in our region that there isn't equality along access to opportunities or even the quality of the educational institutions across the region. And so really hoping and aiming for the coalition to ensure that we can increase youth employability and grow diverse talent pipelines. And see that those are the two ambitious goals that we can try to tackle collectively that will bring about greater equity and opportunity for the young people in our region. Our geography is really centered is really focused on St. Louis City and St. Louis County. But again, with that racial equity lens, we recognize that there are pockets of inequality within St. Louis City, St. Louis County. So we seek to be intentional in our efforts and really focus in where there's the greatest disparities. Our focus is 14 to 25-year-olds, which I know for a lot of you on the call may sound really broad, but I'm going to speak to specifically the strategies that we have to ensure that we are creating a continuous pipeline so that young people at the age of 14 can enter, and by 25 that there is a strong career path for them. I really just want to highlight here that the coalition is really cross-sector collaborative. As Greg highlighted in the beginning, it's really important to bring different stakeholders to the table together. So bringing together business partners along with the nonprofit sector and the government agencies that are connected to the workforce development is really critical so that we can have a shared vision that we're driving together. And it is the power of us coming together to co-develop that vision that we can actually create alignment and achieve that population level change that we seek. Our key strategies as a coalition were co-developed in 2018, and they are to, one, increase access and quality to summer youth employment programs. This is really a recognition that young people, especially those that are coming from under-resourced communities, may not necessarily have exposure to high-growth, high-demand sectors, so that they cannot create a vision or a future for themselves if they do not have access to at least seeing what that could look like. So as a collective, there was a reckoning and a realization that if we really wanted to ensure young people could start to vision a future for themselves in certain sectors, that we needed to increase access to those high-growth, high-demand sectors by increasing summer youth employment experiences. We also wanted to reduce barriers to entry of those programs and completion by having wraparound support services. So there was a recognition that young people, even if they were interested in being part of a program, that there could be other barriers in their lives that prevented them from participating in them. So really the coalition collectively sees that there's power in trying to tackle some of these barriers and ensuring access for young people. And last but not least, really a recognition that credentialing and apprenticeship programs in our region are a great pathway or an alternative, at least a starting point to launch a career. But there wasn't necessarily a system that exposed these opportunities to young people, nor a sense of the quality programs that existed or a full landscape of it. So we wanted to increase access to those programs so that young people could enter those roles that are connected to those programs. So here I really want to highlight or echo what Greg said in terms of population level data. So on the left, what you'll see here is the 20 to 24-year-old unemployment rate. Why this is important is that for some of the school districts in our region, the young people that pursue post-secondary options, only around like 40 to 50% of them actually obtain that four-year degree. So there's a higher likelihood that 20 to 24-year-olds who are seeking employment are doing so in lieu of an educational opportunity. So the reality that 17.8% of African Americans in city and county is a rate of unemployment is really critical and for us to look at, especially when as a nation we think that there's a very tight labor market and all boats are being lifted. On the right, what you can see is the employment status. So again, with the context that a lot of these young people most likely do not have a four-year degree, the reality that such a high percentage are in part-time employment is indicative, again, of the career trajectory that they're potentially on. So just a little bit more context, in St. Louis region, only 49% of the region's population, 25 and older, have a high school diploma but no post-secondary degree. And at the same time, middle skill roles account for 4 out of 10 jobs in the region. Middle skill jobs are jobs that require more education than a high school degree but less than a four-year degree. And given that these roles are in some of our high-growth, high-demand clusters, such as healthcare, construction, advanced manufacturing, and IT, we really see these as a pathway to opportunity, considering the context, again, that a lot of the young people we are attempting to reach most likely have not gone on to get that secondary degree or the post-secondary degree. This is just a little bit more context for those on the call that in terms of middle school roles in our state. So there's over 1 million individuals that are employed in middle school jobs in Missouri. And there is high projected openings and livable wages that are connected to these roles. And a concrete example of that is a medical assistant. So these are individuals that do administrative and support work in the healthcare field, and their starting salary is about $26,000. There's a high demand for this role in our community, and we know that there's a low risk of them being automated. 2 programs that exist in our region are relatively short and are either free or have a low cost associated with them. So again, just highlighting that if we could connect young people to these opportunities, we know that they can enter quality employment that have career advancement. And those roles not only exist in healthcare, but also, as I mentioned earlier, in other sectors that are high growth, high demand. So here what you're seeing is what web developers, what a middle skill role could look like as well. So as I mentioned, the coalition is focusing in on 3 different strategies, and the first one being increasing access and quality to summer youth employment programs. And really the work that we are doing this year is around increasing the toolbox that about 12 summer youth employment programs have in terms of the staff, what training they have to support young people. So we're providing 7 professional development opportunities for about 80 staff that collectively serve 3,000 young people in summer youth employment experiences, and that's happening this spring. We're also bringing together 400 young people for a one-day youth conference on May 30th to expose the 400 young people to the middle skills career pathways that we talked about and the specific training programs that will allow them to be connected to those roles. So again, this is what I was highlighting, but we really highlight that for some of the more community-based organizations that provide summer engagement opportunities, that their support staff a lot of the times are part-time workers. So for those on the webinar, I would highlight that thinking strategically around the toolbox that they have and trying to beef it up to ensure that the young people are properly supported is really critical. Our second strategy, as I mentioned, is to reduce barriers to access and completion. And the 2 specific strategies that the group saw as leverage points on a more systematic level include transportation solutions and coordinated behavioral health support. So for transportation solutions, we had a pilot with our local public transportation system here in St. Louis last year, where we were able to distribute 438 cards that were loaded for 2 months. So again, these were young people that were in summer youth employment experiences, and they were used a little bit more than 20,000 times. So really increased access to those opportunities for young people, and we're aiming to distribute 700 cards this year. The second wraparound support here is a recognition that a lot of the young people that are being served, unfortunately, have either encountered and faced traumatic experiences, or sometimes even faced some sort of trauma during their 8-week experience in the summer, and recognizing that that obviously has cascading effects in their employment opportunities. Seeing that there is significant benefit in tapping into existing behavioral health supports that we could connect young people to, but that individual programs do not need to create themselves, but rather that there's benefit in coming together collectively and trying to create a more holistic system that does referral and follow-up. As I highlighted, the third strategy, again, is really trying to increase access to credentialing and apprenticeship programs, and we see this as being two-pronged. So the first one is really to increase access and awareness, but the second one is knowing that just connecting a young person to a program doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to lead to a job, and recognizing that the business community has a very clear role to play in developing these talent pipelines. So in terms of increasing access and awareness, we conducted a landscape analysis of all the programs, all credentialing and apprenticeship programs in the fall, and are currently building a website that's going to be easy to access, that has the high quality programs that do have a really high rate of connecting young people to employment experiences. And we're going to launch a marketing campaign once that's available to ensure that young people actually are aware of the website and start to use it. And I'm going to pass it back. I'll pass it to Greg in a second. But in terms of the business advisory, we're really working very closely with the chamber to develop this over the last couple of months, and are launching it pretty soon. This is just an example of what the website is going to look like. On the left, you'll see that young people are going to be able to quickly click on an industry cluster that they're interested in, as well as narrow their searches based on what would work best for them. So again, demystifying the opportunities that exist in our community so that we can increase the number of young people who take this option.
So I'm just going to pick up with this, one of these last slides here, really talking about the Chamber's unique role in supporting this coalition. You heard Nataly talk about the various strategies, and they've done a lot of work bringing partners together in workforce and government and social services together to really look at the holistic issues that affect a young person's ability to find employment and to explore post-secondary pathways or job opportunities. And I think that that's all really essential to this work, is taking that system-level view of things. The Chamber's role is really to help create those talent pathways by mobilizing business to really look at creating opportunities for young people to obtain a job in a high-growth, high-demand occupation within the companies that we consider some of the heaviest hitters in the St. Louis region. So I think one point to make here is that a lot of times communities who focus on youth employment, they may focus on simply the act of getting a young person a job. And I think that, getting a young person a job is really important, but we're really taking a more strategic view of saying that it's the type of job that really matters here too. And the Chamber's involved, again, because our employers say that they're experiencing specific workforce shortages. So rather than simply say, we'll charge our employers with just creating job opportunities, we're really asking our employers to think about how they're creating pathways to jobs that are in high demand in their companies and that have high expected growth. Because if a young person's employed even for 6 months or 6 weeks in the summer, they're able to learn some skills that could be immediately valuable to that company. But it's also true that when they're in that job and when they're exploring that job that they have within the company, within the industry that they're working in, that there's a potential that they might see a path for their long-term career growth. And so we want to make sure, again, that we see this as a talent pipeline development strategy for our companies and really urge them to see the value add for their particular companies and for the industries that we know make St. Louis economically competitive. I'll say, I'm going to go into the depth on the task force priorities, but I'll say that we have supported the Regional Youth Employment Coalition prior to the task force launching shortly. The first way that we supported, and Nataly, feel free to jump in here, but the first way that I think we offered support as a chamber was we helped provide some data that enabled the team to really think through what are the employers that we want to target partnerships with, what are the industries that we really want to focus on. And so being able to pull those regional job scans, being able to share the results of our Bridging the Talent Gap survey, I think has been one helpful and concrete way a chamber can support a youth employment initiative. And then we've also hosted some events. We did host their initial kickoff here at the chamber. You see the picture there from that event back in October of last year. And we've also just recently in the spring, we hosted an event for the mayor of St. Louis to urge the private sector to commit jobs to achieve a goal of ensuring that there's 1,000 young people who have access to summer jobs. And so the chamber, again, with our power to convene and our power to bring the private sector to the table, we provided the backdrop and the forum for engagement in those two concrete ways. But the other way is really looking at these specific priorities here. One is, focusing on mobilizing business to increase the number of youth employment opportunities. 2 is aligning business with those short-term training programs. 3 is really working with the HR departments to look at how they hire more qualified candidates without a 4-year degree, and then develop solutions around moving folks from entry-level positions to launching careers and then moving up within their companies. And so we're right now in the process of recruiting business to join this task force. This week we've really focused on our recruitment efforts, and we're going to be hopefully launching this by mid to late April. So it's all very timely. But this will be a way for our business to be a part of a task force that has a clearly defined timeline to really advise on these priorities and help us to grow those talent pipelines for their companies.
So I hope that the strategic plan and the specific activities that we're doing has been at least good takeaways for you guys to think about if they are applicable to your communities. But I would definitely highlight a couple of lessons learned. The first one is that your strategic plan around increasing youth employability or really trying to tackle racial equity in workforce development should really be co-produced. So that it is very critical to bring a number of different stakeholders to the table that touch the issue from a number of different viewpoints. Because the reality is that there are likely a number of initiatives already or dozens of organizations in the workforce development space that have a priority similar to trying to ensure greater access to opportunities. But no one organization or no one program can achieve population level change. They can obviously achieve client outcomes, but in order to truly tackle population level goals that are really ambitious and very complex, it's very important to bring multiple stakeholders. And that work is only going to move as fast as the relationships that are at the table. So if I could offer any piece of wisdom that you could take away from today is that it's very important to bring multiple stakeholders to the table and to really invest the time that it takes to build the relationships with them so that you can collectively come together and actually co-develop an agenda. When people genuinely feel like they've developed something, they will take ownership of it and run with it. And so for there to be a regional agenda or an agenda for a community, it's very important for them to genuinely be engaged in that process. And that once you have developed a plan, to recognize that it's probably not going to be the most perfect plan, but that is okay because complex problems require complex solutions, and that there's learning in that, especially trying to do pilots and testing things out is really how you start to get a sense of what will ultimately have an impact. So just taking action and just trying some low-hanging fruit will allow you to build the muscle, the collaborative muscle to tackle even more complex potential solutions. So don't be afraid to act, but definitely make sure that whatever action is being taken, that there's genuinely buy-in from other stakeholders, and that they also have a clear role in implementation. Because again, it's very important to align the various stakeholders that are at the table, because everybody's committed to similar goals. But if there's a shared goal, that's unstoppable.
So that really concludes our presentation. We're happy now to take questions or engage in dialogue with anyone who wants to maybe go a little bit deeper on some of the points that we raised. There's our information, our contact information is there. And I didn't really mention too much in depth earlier when I talked about the employer survey that we did, the Bridging the Talent Gap survey. That's an initiative that has been led by the Graduate Network, which is a network that has a lot of communities that are focused on adult degree attainment primarily. As part of that network, we received a grant from them and Walmart to complete that grant project to basically survey our employers and then have a data presentation with our members to talk about their workforce pain points. So that's something that I can get you contact information for the folks who helped us with that project as well, if you'd be interested in that.
Okay. Well, thank you, Greg and Nataly, for the presentation and all that great information. If anyone has any questions for Greg or Nataly, go ahead and type them in the question box. You can open up the box by clicking on that little triangle and just type it in and send it, and I will see the question and I will read it out. Let's see if we have any here. Don't have any questions so far. Just a reminder while we're waiting that the webinar was recorded or is being recorded, and it will be up on our website within the next 2 business days, so by Monday, and I will also post the handout that they have there as well. So let's see here. Okay, I don't see any questions. Give you a few more minutes. Greg or Nataly, you have any other words to add or any closing thoughts, I guess, while we wait to see if anyone has any questions to type in?
No, I think I'll just add that I thought Nataly's last point about, the process for bringing folks together and really creating collective action. I think that's a lot of communities that I've learned from, have tried efforts that are focused on that more systemic level change. And I think the key takeaway is, that the process is, as Nataly pointed out, which I think she said complicated problems require, sometimes complex solutions. It involves relationship building. I think that's one of the most important things is knowing that, you're going to be in it with a team of folks that aren't necessarily working in your organization individually, and that you need to build. It takes time to build some of those relationships. And so we, the Chamber, obviously have some good close relationships with our private sector employers, but they may not have those employers may not have the closest relationships yet with partners in the workforce space. As you saw in that survey, many of them are not actively partnering with them. And so knowing that that's kind of a key next step in building those relationships, I think is something that's on my mind. And I just wanted to underscore what Nataly said about how that shouldn't be a reason to not try to do the work either, because it may take a while, it may take some time, and sometimes, especially if you're working with business leaders, they want to see outcomes right away. They want to see results fast. And I think that as a chamber and a convener in this work, you got to keep your eye on the bigger picture and realize that you can move fast, you can take action, but you also need to realize that it'll move as fast as the relationships and the strength of those relationships, and that's a key part of this. It's not simply creating a program and having a good idea. It's really about cultivating the relationships that are necessary to turn ideas into action. Okay, very, very true, very wise advice there. We do have a question from one of our participants. The question is, so far, how has the response been to creating summer employment opportunities?
and who has been taking the lead on building those business partnerships? He says that their chamber is currently working on a similar internship initiative.
Yeah, I'll let Nataly kind of answer the broader question about what the coalition has seen in terms of, preparing for this upcoming summer and momentum around, jobs that have been created. And then I'm really I'll say that I'm the one that's really right now taking the lead at my chamber to bring the private sector employers that are part of the task force together. I've done a lot of the work with Valerie Patton on our team, who is our Vice President of Inclusion and Talent, here to help with some of the data gathering and making sure that we held those events. We did a lot of the staff work for that, but that's primarily my role in helping support the Youth Employment Coalition is really reaching out to our contacts that are part of our investors, our board members, and asking them to, asking the CEO or Chief Human Resource Officer to actually participate in the upcoming meetings, in the upcoming strategy for creating some of these talent pathways that Nataly touched on.
So I will say that the coalition is still relatively new, and the specific summer employment programs that are part of the group pre-existed. So there are about 12 summer youth employment programs that are part of the coalition. Some of them are very small shops with maybe just one employee or two employees, and there's others that serve about 1,000 young people per summer. And I will say that of those 12 organizations, that all of them had independently been trying to reach out to employers and have been doing so for a number of years. However, the effectiveness of having 10 people call one person with the same ask is not as strong as having a unified ask of a collective with the chamber and other key community leaders saying that this is critically important, not only for like philanthropic good press, but also because it's going to increase the labor pool in our region that will ultimately increase the employees that will serve, that hopefully will be employed in these companies. So I will definitely say that we, as a group, there's been more of individual action, but with the support of the chamber and with this business advisory, the goal is to have a more unified voice that is able to increase the number of slots, because there's sort of been a cap in the number of opportunities that can occur in our region. And to be quite honest, part of that is that it's government dollars that fund summer youth employment experiences that pay the young people. So a lot of the times young people are not being paid by the employers that they work for in the summer, but rather with tax dollars. But there's a certain cap in the dollars that are available. So it needs a business commitment to pay the salary of the young people in order to genuinely increase the number of slots available in our community. But that's not unique to St. Louis. That's happening nationwide.
Okay. Well, thanks very much. I think that we don't have any more questions. So just a reminder that you can find the recording of this webinar by going to the ACCE webpage, www.acce.org. Click on Professional Development, hover over ACC University Online, and click on Webinars. And our next our next live webinar will be a week from today on Thursday, April 11th at 2 p.m. East Coast time. It will be presented by Kathy Height, and she'll be presenting the second in her two-part membership series, and will be covering journey mapping to improve the member experience. Each of your members is on a journey to fulfill their expectations of their new chamber membership or renewal. And in this webinar, you'll learn how to use journey maps to onboard new members, increase engagement, and build your chamber's leadership pipeline. You can register for this webinar on our ACC events page, which you can find by going to the home page, going to events, and then navigating and clicking to upcoming webinars. You'll also be getting some e-blasts about that. So thank you again to Greg and Nataly for taking the time to present today's webinar. Thanks everyone for your participation and interest. If you have any follow-up questions for Greg or Nataly, you can contact them directly or feel free to reach out to me. and we will do our best to answer your questions. So have a wonderful afternoon, everyone, and we will see you on the next ACC webinar. Bye-bye.